She smiled at the wedding. She held the baby in the hospital. She brought casseroles. But behind the concern, behind the gentle advice, she was documenting everything. Every tear, every mistake, every vulnerable moment. Because she didn't just want to be a grandmother. She wanted to be the mother. Tonight's story is about obsession, control, and a woman who believed love was something you could take. This is the second mother. Margaret Whittaker had always believed that if she stood still long enough, the world would rearrange itself back into the shape she preferred. On Tuesday evenings, she stood at her living room window and watched the neighboring houses glow gold at dusk. Families moved behind curtains. Children ran through sprinklers. Dogs barked. She imagined what those homes felt like inside. Orderly, needed, centered around her. Across town, in a different house that should have been hers, her grandson was learning to recognize his mother's face. Margaret adjusted the curtain slightly. Daniel used to call every Tuesday. He hadn't in 3 months. Emma Whittaker did not know she was being studied. Her world was small in the way new motherhood makes it small, measured in naps, feeding intervals, and the warm weight of a baby against her collarbone. Noah was 6 months old now. He had Daniel's eyes. He had Emma's calm. The house was messy in the honest way of someone living inside it. Bottles drying by the sink, a burp cloth on the couch, lullabies half hummed while folding laundry. She felt tired, but deeply content. That contentment was what Margaret could not tolerate. Chapter 3. Margaret before. Margaret had not always been this woman. At 24, she had been sharp and quick and ambitious. She once wrote essays about constitutional reform. She once imagined standing before a courtroom. Then Daniel came. Then Robert left. And Margaret made a quiet choice she never admitted was a choice. She replaced ambition with devotion. Daniel became her success, her witness, her purpose. When he left for college, she experienced something close to panic. Not sadness. Panic. The house had been too quiet. The phone too still. Her reflection too unfamiliar. When he met Emma, Margaret recognized something instinctively. Emma was not temporary. Margaret's campaign did not begin with kidnapping. It began with suggestion. One afternoon, while holding Noah, she said lightly, "He cries a lot when you're not in the room. That can sometimes mean insecurity." Emma blinked. "He's 6 months old." Margaret smiled gently. "Of course. I'm just mentioning what I've read." That evening, Daniel asked, "Do you think he cries more than normal?" Emma laughed it off. But doubt entered the room. Margaret understood something critical. You do not dismantle a marriage with accusations. You do it with concern. Margaret began keeping a notebook. Not dramatic. Not unhinged. Organized. Dates. Times. Observations. Emma appeared fatigued. Forgot diaper bag. Kitchen unsanitary. Baby rash untreated for 6 hours. Each entry felt responsible. Caring. Protective. She researched custody laws quietly. Emergency guardianship statutes. Wellness checks. Mandatory reporters. She scheduled a consultation under the pretense of estate planning. The attorney's name was Thomas Keller. When she sat in his office, she said carefully, "If a grandparent believes a child is in danger, what are the options?" He gave procedural answers. Margaret took notes. Daniel trusted his mother. He also trusted his wife. But trust does not prevent influence. Margaret began calling him during work hours. "She seems overwhelmed. She left Noah unattended for a full minute while I was there. She snapped at me." Daniel defended Emma at first. But seeds grow. One evening, he came home and found Emma crying quietly in the nursery. "I'm just tired," she said. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind. Postpartum can be unpredictable. He hated himself for thinking it. 3 weeks later, Emma opened the door to a social worker. "Routine wellness follow-up," the woman said politely. Emma's hands went cold. She had done nothing wrong. The visit was brief. Professional. Non-accusatory. But humiliating. Daniel was furious. Who would do that? Margaret arrived later with flowers. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "How awful." Emma watched her carefully. For the first time, she wondered. Emma was not naive. One afternoon, while helping Margaret look for a misplaced phone, she found the notebook. Margaret snatched it too quickly. Emma pretended not to notice. But that night, she told Daniel, "She's documenting me." Daniel hesitated. "She worries." Emma's voice hardened. No, she's building something. Daniel didn't want to believe that. Because if Emma was right, then his mother was dangerous. Margaret accelerated. The pediatric appointment was not impulsive. It was chosen. She had already installed the spare car seat, already packed a diaper bag, already filled out preliminary, emergency guardianship paperwork citing maternal instability. She planned to file it the following morning. All she needed was physical possession, temporary custody, then evaluation, then court. She told herself the system would validate her. When Emma ran back inside the clinic, Margaret moved. Her heartbeat thundered. Her mind quieted. This was correction. This was rescue. This was reclaiming. But she miscalculated something fatal. Emma was not fragile. She was decisive. And the law responds faster than obsession anticipates. Emma didn't sleep the night Margaret was arrested. Not because Noah was fussy, but because the silence felt wrong. Daniel installed 3 security cameras the next morning. Front door, backyard, nursery. Emma didn't tell him she had already ordered 2 more. She had begun locking doors during the day, checking windows, watching the street longer than necessary. When you realize someone has been studying you, you start studying everything back. Margaret made bail within 48 hours. Thomas Keller worked quickly. It was a misunderstanding, he told reporters outside the courthouse. Margaret said nothing. Her silence made her appear dignified. Wounded, victimized. Online, the narrative began to split. Overbearing grandmother or unstable new mother overreacting? Margaret didn't need the public fully on her side. She just needed doubt. 3 nights later, Emma's phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Instead, she opened the message. I hope you're sleeping better tonight. No name, no context. Her blood ran cold. She showed Daniel. He told himself it was coincidence. But he checked the cameras twice that night. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, hands folded neatly over her notebook. She hadn't expected to be arrested, but she had expected resistance. Every move Emma made now would reinforce Margaret's narrative. Installing cameras? Paranoia. Checking locks obsessively? Anxiety. Receiving strange messages? Instability. Margaret did not send the text, but she didn't need to. Chaos works even when you don't control it. Daniel began noticing things he couldn't unsee. Emma jumped at small noises. She reread text messages repeatedly. She accused Margaret of sending the anonymous message. There's no proof, Daniel said carefully. Emma stared at him. She took our son. I know. Then why are you still protecting her? He didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt both of them. A week later, another wellness check. This one more formal, more probing. Has Mrs. Whitaker exhibited signs of delusional thinking? The social worker asked gently. Emma felt something snap. She kidnapped my child. Yes, ma'am. We're aware, but we're required to evaluate all environmental stressors. Margaret had filed a concern, this time under her own name, claiming Emma was experiencing post-traumatic fixation. Daniel's face went pale reading the report. Margaret had framed the kidnapping as an impulsive act driven by fear for Noah's safety. She had claimed Emma's response afterward was disproportionate and obsessive. The words were clinical, strategic. Emma began watching Margaret's house online through public court documents. That's how she found the name Claire Benson, a neighbor listed as character witness. Emma recognized the name. Claire had once stopped by with cookies months ago. Friendly. Observant. Too observant. Emma searched social media. Found photos. Margaret and Claire having lunch. 3 weeks before the kidnapping. Emma's stomach dropped. Margaret had been building credibility. Daniel received an anonymous email at work. Subject line, you deserve the truth. Attached was an audio file. It was Emma's voice. Crying. Saying, sometimes I feel like I'm losing my mind. Daniel's heart pounded. He remembered that night. She had been exhausted. Venting? But how had it been recorded? He played it again. Background noise. A faint click. Margaret had been in the kitchen that evening. Daniel felt something shift permanently inside him. 3 days later, Emma came home from the grocery store to find the nursery window open. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed. Except one thing. The baby monitor had been moved. Emma stood frozen in the doorway. She hadn't imagined the text. She hadn't imagined the pattern. Someone was escalating. Police dusted for prints. Nothing usable. Margaret denied everything. Calmly. Convincingly. I would never violate a restraining order, she said. And technically, she hadn't. Margaret did not break into the house. But she knew who might have. Claire's son had a minor record. Petty theft. Trespassing. Margaret never asked him directly. She simply mentioned how unstable Emma had become. How cameras made children anxious. How Daniel deserved clarity. She let others act. That way her hands stayed clean. Emma stopped reacting. She started documenting screenshots, timelines, phone metadata. She hired a forensic IT consultant. The anonymous text traced back to a prepaid device purchased 2 towns over. Surveillance footage from the store? Margaret's car was parked outside that same plaza that afternoon. Daniel stared at the still image for a long time. His mother stepped out of frame holding a small white bag. He felt sick. The courtroom was colder than Emma expected. Margaret looked composed. Elegant. Her lawyer argued. My client acted out of concern. Mrs. Whitaker's recent behaviors, installing excessive surveillance, obsessive documentation, indicate emotional instability. Emma's attorney countered with evidence. The prepaid phone, the recorded audio, the documented consultations with custody attorneys months prior. Margaret's face remained neutral, but inside something trembled. She had underestimated Emma. During a recess, Daniel's father approached him quietly. There's something you should know, he said. Years ago, during their divorce, Margaret had attempted to file a motion claiming Robert was mentally unfit. There had been journals then, too. Documentation? Character witnesses. It failed. But the pattern was unmistakable. Daniel felt the ground shift. This wasn't about Noah. It had never been about Noah. It was about control. Back in court, Emma's attorney introduced Margaret's journal entries. Highlighted phrases. Emma's presence is corrosive. Daniel must see clearly. The child will bond quickly once removed. Removed. The judge's expression hardened. Margaret felt the room tilt. For the first time, she looked at Emma not as rival, but as threat. Emma met her gaze steadily, unafraid. That night, Margaret did something reckless. She drove to the Whitaker house, parked 2 streets over, watched. Lights glowed softly inside. She imagined walking up the driveway, knocking, demanding entry. Instead, she sat in the dark, for hours, until a police cruiser pulled slowly down the street. Margaret didn't move. She simply watched her son's house and realized something horrifying. It no longer felt like hers at all. Restraining order extended. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Pending charges elevated due to evidence of harassment and manipulation. Margaret remained free pending trial. But Daniel cut contact. Fully. No calls, no visits, no mediation. The silence was absolute. And Margaret had never truly been alone before. Months later, Emma stood in Noah's room watching him sleep. Daniel wrapped his arms around her. It's over, he said. Emma nodded. But she knew something about obsession. It rarely ends cleanly. Across town, Margaret sat in her dim apartment staring at a blank notebook. For the first time, she didn't write. Because she finally understood something she had refused to see. You cannot rewrite someone else's story without destroying your own. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in a child's life is the one who believes she loves him most.